when your clients call you and say, you will never guess what this employee did today, it's kind of like privileged gossip. If something's happening in the world, it's happening in a workplace as well, and conversations are being had. We had employees posting this on social media and their opinions here and there. What are their First Amendment rights to post this? And can we terminate them for saying these things about murder or advocating for this or that? The CEO of the company is taking the time to review how much mouse movement people are using on the computer. Yeah, don't you have better things to do, right? More often than not, former employees or employees who want to sue, they're using ChatGPT. And so ChatGPT is good enough that it is bringing up the trigger words, it's harassment, discrimination, retaliation. Lawsuits are not filed by way of what the actual truth is. They're filed based on an employee's perception.
This is the Litigator's Edge, the podcast where smart strategy, practical innovation, and real-world experience come together to move litigation forward. Each week, we sit down with attorneys, legal tech leaders, and trusted advisors who are rethinking how great legal work gets done. You'll hear how law firms are building a competitive advantage. These conversations are grounded, insightful, and designed to help you refine how you work and how you win. Here is your host, Aniket Sawant.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Litigator's Edge, the podcast where innovative attorneys reveal the strategies that have transformed their legal practice. My name is Aniket Sawant, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Threadio. My guest today is a dynamic force in labor and employment law, serving as a go-to compliance strategist for employers and higher educational institutions across the Mid-Atlantic. She has built a reputation for keeping clients out of the courtroom through proactive culture building and high-energy training. What makes her perspective so unique is her ability to make complex legal compliance undeniably engaging in a variety of ways. It's my pleasure to welcome Leah Stiegler to the podcast. Welcome, Leah, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Aniket. I'm glad to be here.
It's my pleasure. Leah, as you know, I love to start each episode with asking my guest about either a fun fact that they have to share about themselves or a cringe joke. Which will it be for you, and what is it?
Oh, gosh. All right, I'll do a fun fact, an embarrassing fact.
Please.
I was recently talking about Halloween costumes with a friend, and my mom overheard and reminded me about the time I dressed as a broccoli for Halloween. So I always wanted to be like the funny kid in class, and I thought, this was maybe in 5th grade or 4th grade even, where kids hated eating broccoli. And so I tried to make the argument that broccoli was scary. And so my mom took me to the store, and I was like adamant I had to do this. And so I got dark green tights, a dark green turtleneck shirt, and then a sombrero that we painted green and then like cut up and glued broccoli pieces all over.
Oh my gosh.
And so everybody thought I was like a leprechaun. But a lot of the kids, they just were not smart enough to get the joke that broccoli was scary. But I will never live down those pictures.
That's pretty amazing. It probably comes from the pre-social media days, at least. So, there's not too many of them floating around on the internet, which is probably a good thing.
Percent, yeah. There are never going to be photos of that on social media.
That's awesome. That is quite a fun story, and especially it's not like you went into like a Spirit Halloween and just picked up a broccoli costume. Actually, you and your mom actually made this, which is fantastic.
Yeah, back in the day where you have to go to Michael's and put together a costume.
Yeah. No, good time. Well, thank you for sharing that. That was awesome. The next question is kind of a bit of a hard segue from that one, but I'll try. Every attorney, and I really do mean this, every attorney who makes the time to be on this podcast, Leah, I think of them as a superhero, and every superhero has an origin story, and I would love to learn yours.
Well, okay, all right. Well, in terms of becoming I don't know if I'd classify myself as a superhero. But in your context, in terms of becoming a lawyer superhero, when I was younger, I lived in a cul-de-sac, and I used to always get all the kids together to play, whether it was roller hockey or basketball or kickball. And I'm just a sports fanatic, and I'm very incredibly competitive, which is maybe where the lawyer, kind of the litigator aspect of my life comes from. And so I remember one summer we were playing kickball, and there were tons of little rocks all over the cul-de-sac because in the wintertime, the city would come by and they would dump tons of sand and salt and rocks so that the snow, I guess, would melt quicker and people wouldn't slip. And so it was like spring or summer. And one of the kids in the cul-de-sac went to round the bases in kickball, and slipped and fell and broke their arm. And then another time we were playing basketball and I slipped and cut open my knee. And so come that fall in November, the mayor of our town was coming around the cul-de-sac and actually individually handing out pamphlets and introducing herself that she was running for mayor again. And I was a young kid. I was home from school. My parents weren't home. And I opened up the door and we just started having this conversation. And she said, "Yeah, I'm the mayor." And I was like, "You're the mayor?" And at the time, for like, for like a 13-year-old, you think of the mayor as the president, right? You're just like, wow, that's the mayor, it's your autograph. And she said, "If your parents are home and at some point, can you give them this pamphlet?" And I said, "Well, I've got something for you." And I told her about how all the kids were slipping and hurting themselves. And we needed the rocks to be cleaned up in our cul-de-sac because it was just a hazard. It was dangerous. And so literally the next day, trucks came in, like those trucks with the big brushes on the side, and they brushed up and moved all of the salt or the sand that they had put there so that we could play. So, and she wrote me a letter, and I still have it to this day about, thanking me for being a citizen that cared so much about the community and all this. And as a young kid, I mean, I was like, this is incredible. I think my parents were also pretty impressed that the mayor actually responded to like a 13-year-old kid who had an issue. So anyways, all that to say is I really started to see, wow, there's a lot that can be done if you are in a position of power. And so I just really became fascinated with the idea of local government and thought maybe I'd want to go that route. And so when I went after college, I decided I'll go to law school, get a law degree, and then maybe I can either pursue something like politics or go into private practice and figure out where I want to be. And I ended up going to private practice, so really do enjoy that. But it was kind of actually seeing that change was happening at that local level that made me want to go this route.
Wow, what a great story. I mean, there's so many things right with that story, right? I mean, your advocacy, your initiative, and then the proactive response from the mayor. So that's a wonderful story all around. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I was like, man, I want to be in a position of power where I just like snap my fingers and all of a sudden a truck with, brushes comes through a
Yeah,
neighborhood.
that's great. So maybe you're in that position right now where you could snap your fingers and a truck comes over, but even if not in that specific position, I think I'd love to learn about, so what has been your journey or trajectory since law school? So what does that look like from when you were in law school to where you are today?
Yeah, in law school, I actually focused a lot on environmental law, and I had an environmental science background in undergrad. I tried a few internships in that area, but from a personality standpoint, I'm a lot more of an extrovert, and environmental law is very regulatory based. It's a lot of working with statutes like the Clean Water Act, dealing with property disputes, or maybe representing nonprofits, or the actual clients that don't speak, like mountains and trees and stuff like that. I enjoyed the work, but from a personality standpoint, I definitely needed something with a lot more gossip. And so when I ended up clerking for a federal judge in Norfolk, Virginia, and we did a lot of employment law cases that came through the courthouse, and I really liked it. And so the firm that I'm with now, Woods Rogers, I had summered with them, and they had an opening in on their employment law team, and there's a lot of gossip in the employment law world, and so I was like, let me go. That's a good get for gossip law. So I ended up joining the team, and I've been here a little over 10 years.
That's amazing. That's a first. I haven't heard of that as a field of legal practice, but I will not forget that.
Yeah. Well, when your clients call you and say, "You will never guess what this employee did today," it's kind of like privileged gossip.
Right. That's a great way to think about it. Let's talk about that actually. So what is the most common call that you get from a client? And then what does that tell you sort of about the realities in terms of what's happening at a particular client or across companies in general?
You know, the common call changes based on what's happening in the world, right? So, and in general, you get the very common calls about, hey, this person's not performing, or they're absent and tardy a lot, or hey, we have we're low in budget. We need to do a reduction in force and talk through some terminations. Those are just kind of the always in the background calls. But usually, if something's happening in the world, it's happening in a workplace as well, and conversations are being had. So I'll give you the example of when Charlie Kirk was killed. That week, I probably got 8 calls from clients saying, oh my gosh, we had employees posting this on social media and their opinions here and there. What are their First Amendment rights to post this? And can we terminate them for, saying these things about murder or advocating for this or that? During elections, right? We get a lot of calls about that. When Russia invaded Ukraine, I had a week or two of calls dealing with employee disputes in workplaces all across the or up and down the East Coast, where employees were accusing employees who maybe had a Russian background that their country was messed up, and so really what's happening in the world tends to make its way into the workplace because humans are humans and they're going to express their opinions on things. They don't drop their opinions or who they are when they walk through the doors to work. So I would say really if you say it's happening, like holiday parties, that's coming up on our forefront here. And I'm going to get a lot of calls on January 1st through the 6th about, crazy things people did at holiday parties.
That's fascinating, actually. So yeah, so on the performance related issues and the holiday party related issues, I think those have been sort of unfortunately evergreen, like those have always sort of existed. But the second set of issues which you mentioned, which is folks expressing themselves and having the platforms to express themselves where everybody can see it, I think that sort of, it sounds like that adds a new wrinkle or dimension to the kind of work that you have.
Yeah, it's not just employees maybe walking down the hall or talking in the break room and insulting each other or having a debate about the presidential debate the night before or something like that. Really, a lot of it comes even from social media. I mean, yes, there's the concept that what you do on your own time when you're not at work, when you're clocked out, that should be separate and apart from work. But the truth is, it never really can be. An employee is always kind of 24/7 representing their company. And just from a workplace standpoint, a culture standpoint, if I'm an employee and I see my coworker post something on Facebook that I find highly insensitive and derogatory or discriminatory, how am I going to just show up the next day and work sitting next to them, right? So what people are doing outside of work obviously impacts the workplace. And so from a culture standpoint, these are things that employment lawyers have to deal with all the time.
It makes a lot of sense. So let's talk a little bit about the work that you do to proactively get ahead of this or enable your clients to get ahead of this, both employers and the employees who work with them. So I know you focus a lot on proactive advising and training and helping employers build a better workplace culture. Can you speak a little bit more to the work that you do in that regard?
Yeah, management trainings are a huge thing and workforce trainings. I'd say at least once a week, my colleagues and I are somewhere on site at a client location, training a group of managers as to kind of the employment laws 101, right? Harassment, discrimination, but then also not just the concepts, but how should you respond when you see offensive conduct? Or how do you prevent us from even getting to offensive conduct? The ADA or the Americans with Disabilities Act or medical leave issues, and talking with them about how do you deal with accommodating someone with a mental health condition in the workplace. So actually giving managers the tools to respond, to be proactive and to prevent things, and then also to kind of remedy things that do come up. A bad client is a client who only calls their lawyer when they're sued with something. Our best clients and our clients that are almost never in court and probably have the lowest amount of legal fees are those clients that are calling proactively, that are doing the management trainings. They're giving their managers the tools to respond and then to address the situations. And then they're calling and working with us through employment issues that come forward to HR or senior management, right?
That makes sense. Normally, when one thinks of management training or corporate training, the general perception, this is not always the case, but the general perception is that they're often going to be dry and boring, especially when it relates to, matters of topics that are serious, like the ones that you mentioned. And so in your case, that's clearly not true, because you have a dynamic speaking style, you're very engaging. I can see that. How did you develop this approach, and how do clients respond to it?
Yeah, no, people always come up after trainings and they'll say to me and they'll say to my colleagues, I was really dreading coming in today to have to sit through this training, but I learned a lot and that was amazing. That was great. It's because we love it. I really had great mentors at my firm, and they started this style of speaking to managers like you were having a conversation. We may use a PowerPoint, we may use fun videos, but We talk about real life things. This isn't just like a video that you click through on the computer and answer a little quiz at the end. We will talk about situations like what people post on social media, right? We'll talk about the kind of the things that are at the forefront in the news and how they're making their way to the workplace. And we open up the floor a lot of times for managers to, this is your opportunity for free legal advice, right? Ask us, let's all talk about what you're dealing with your subordinates, with your employees and the culture here. And so we have a great time with it. If we don't switch it up and keep it dynamic, it's boring for us. I mean, it's hard to talk for 4 to 5 hours in a day and keep people engaged. But I will say we try to make it fun. You've got to make it funny too. Early on in my career, I was always worried that if we made it too funny talking about something serious like sexual harassment, could that come across as offensive to people, right? Especially someone who maybe has experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. So you have to kind of tread carefully with stuff like that. At the same time, there's got to be some level of levity to what you're talking about because it is heavy stuff. It's heavy to talk about someone's disability or like a harassment issue. It's heavy to talk about age discrimination, an employee death in the workplace. So we try to keep it fun and light. And I'd say I can't take credit for my speaking style, even though it's just the way I probably naturally speak. I wouldn't have had the floor to do so if it weren't for the chairs of my employment law practice group in my firm.
That's amazing. So you have to find the right balance of obviously staying on topic, but also channeling your inner fourth or fifth gear with the broccoli costume. Basically.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I always tell managers or employees when I'm doing a workforce training, I'm pretty sure I'm going to offend at least one of you in this audience. Probably 90% of you, I will say something offensive, right? But I'm not doing my job unless I can make you feel uncomfortable and we can talk through it. And so I do think by the end of it, the majority of people they respect what you're saying and what you're doing, and they're engaged. I also think you have to do it kind of like a podcast in a way, right? It has to be somewhat of a back and forth to keep people active, and they have to be able to give their own opinions and thoughts. You can't just lecture at them.
That makes sense. So, obviously this is a huge emphasis, and prevention is better than cure, but sometimes, things sort of spill over into litigation. So can you talk a little bit more about that side of your practice and what are the various areas that you focus on in litigation?
Yeah, well, I tried to tell people that I really want to keep them out of litigation. And most people think it's because I have their best interests at heart, that it's an expensive process and you never know what a jury's going to do. But the truth is, Aniket, I just don't like wearing a suit. I hate going in, and I wear sneakers every day. I could show you my sneakers. I hate having to put on shoes with hard bottoms. And so I have a true underlying motive to keep my clients out of court. And so, if we get to a point where we are dealing with litigation, I was just talking to a client this morning, and I'll say to them, you might have the best case in the world. Literally, you have the best defense. We talked through this employee numerous times before you had to terminate them. We've got incredible documentation, stacks of documentation, binders of documentation. But unfortunately, in order for us to get to a jury and put on this case, it's going to cost you a lot more from a legal fees standpoint than it will to resolve this for a nominal amount or a reasonable amount much earlier on. So you're kind of doing a lot of just business counseling throughout. But then from a litigation standpoint, yeah, I mean, early on, we do a lot of fact-finding interviews. So I don't like to just talk to one person in the company and get their opinion, because then you're kind of tainted by what maybe the CEO or your HR contact or the general counsel, whoever you're working with. But I actually like to talk to the employees that may be called as witnesses or the managers and get a feel for what's the real reality here.
That makes a lot of sense. It's interesting that, even as your client thinks that they may be headed towards litigation, and maybe that's what eventually happens, it's interesting that you still focus on the business counseling to sort of, soften the blow, whatever that may be. Now, taking a step back, now let's say that, how would you make the business case for a busy CEO or an HR leader in a particular organization to sort of invest more in the prevention upfront rather than deal with it later in the manner that you described? What do you say to them?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's funny because when I deal with litigation, oftentimes, you'll kind of pick up on things like, okay, wow, maybe this manager is a pretty bad manager, or doesn't really facilitate conversation, just tells people what to do. And that's why the employee probably felt like they weren't being heard. And then they compared themselves to another employee and said, oh, you know what? This is gender discrimination because he hears him, but he doesn't hear me, and I'm a female. And then we could have prevented this whole lawsuit if this manager had just listened. Right. And so sometimes as you're going through and picking up on the facts, a good lawyer, I think, takes stock of this stuff. And then even once you resolve a case, whether through settlement or you get it dismissed, a jury verdict, is bringing the client back to the table and being able to explain to them, I don't think we would have gotten here if we had addressed the actual problem, right? And here's, from a culture standpoint, here's a problem that we saw, that we discovered during the litigation. You may know of it or not know of it, but this is something I'd be mindful of, right? Not necessarily resulting in let's terminate this manager, but let's do some coaching and counseling. I think a company from a preventative standpoint can do a lot. It's not just about training managers. I think getting good managers or people who have maybe a good expertise on product or services or his longevity in the company may just need like an executive coach. Maybe they need confidence. Maybe they have anger management issues. There's a lot of things that a company can do to help someone be a better performer, because ultimately your leadership and what they do and how they interact, that's going to just trickle down to the individual employees. I don't know if you've ever been in a workplace culture where you're like, you really like leadership or you really don't like leadership, but it changes your dynamic when you walk in the door every day.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. As you were saying that last piece, Leah, I was thinking about, many employees sort of work for their manager more than they work for their company. And as you were saying that, it's like it's such a big influence on what I feel about if I'm an employee, how I feel about my work situation, just how the people around me act.
I was just talking to a client about this because I was picking up that my client, the person who is paying our firm's invoices, might be the problem. And sometimes it's really hard to tell a client that they are the problem. And so lawyers have really tricky ways of doing it. I'm sure it was very clear to me that this client is micromanaging their employees. And to the extent that they've installed software on their computers, and the CEO of the company is taking the time to review how much mouse movement people are using on the computer every day.
Wow.
Yeah, actually has access to each employee's emails, and so can, complain that maybe there wasn't a sent email to another employee. And I'm like, number one, don't you have better things to do, right? And then, the approach that this CEO has is, well, these people must be engaged in fraud. Like, they're not spending a full 40 hours a week on my work and blah, blah, blah. I can see they're taking these long breaks and 30 minutes here and 20 minutes here, and they're work from home. And I'm like, are they getting the job done? Like, is their performance good? And I think it's really hard to convey to a CEO or a manager, because they probably have invested so much in that department or that company, and they don't want to see it fail. And so they really do want to make sure they have the right people and people who are dedicated. But from my perspective, I'm trying to convey as a coaching technique to coach my client, like, the person's performance is actually quite good. You haven't complained to me once about their performance. In fact, they turn things in early, which either means, one, you're not giving them enough work, or two, this isn't a great employee benefit for them. They get paid for 40 hours a week, but they only work 30, and you get incredible work product. What's the issue? Do you want them to literally just sit there and move a mouse around for another 8 hours a day? So it's kind of like reframing the issue for the client. The issue is not this employee isn't performing. They are performing. The issue is that you're giving them a benefit that you feel now they're taking advantage of. And that's not the issue. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, thank you for sharing that specific anecdote. I've heard through the grapevine indirectly that some companies engage in practices like this, but to hear that laid out and the leader's viewpoint on why they're doing that is also fascinating. So I think that's very valuable. Thank you for sharing.
Well, I was even just talking to one of my best friends, and she has a new manager. You can tell the new manager really cares about the job and wants to be involved and make sure everyone underneath her is up to speed and getting their tasks done. But my friend said that every single day, she and all of her coworkers in this sales team are required to send an email to the manager of everything they did that day. And she was like, it just takes another 20 minutes out of my day to do this. And then there's also, they feel like she doesn't trust them, right? Instead of requiring someone to do something like that only if they're on a performance improvement plan, or only if you actually see them dropping the ball on projects or missing deadlines, maybe that would be something you should require. But just to kind of give people extra work, to give them extra work so you can feel like you're in charge of them, doesn't really help the situation, right? That's a culture standpoint.
That makes so much sense. Leah, in addition to all the work that you do from the training perspective and the guidance that you provide your clients during litigation, you also have a popular video series called What's the T in L&E? And I thought that's a great title, first of all. So, but can you talk a little bit more about the video series, the topics you cover, and some recent episodes or what you're hearing on the show?
Yeah, no, what's the tea? That goes back to full circle to the gossip thing, right?
Exactly.
To be honest, I didn't know. I mean, when we were coming up with options, my marketing team, I was like, oh, we should do something like gossiping with Leah or whatever, but they were like, well, what about what's the tea? And I was like, what? What does that even mean? But one of our marketing people is more in the Gen Z.
I was going to say.
And so she was like, what do you mean you don't know what's the tea? And so she's like educated me on this tagline. And so, but it's done well. It's what's the T in labor and employment, what's the T in L&E. And I have guests on and we talk about all things good employment law.
That's great. Switching gears a little bit to things that are now, especially today, affecting a lot of the issues that you might see in employment law, and you touched upon this with the social media and people expressing themselves. In addition to the social media, which you obviously discussed, what are some other areas within technology, remote work, collaboration tools, and that are creating some challenges for employers? And today, what are some of the largest tech related issues that land a company sort of in hot water?
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll start with the first one. Obviously ChatGPT. I wish I had a really good friend who was a doctor, because I want to be like, are your patients using ChatGPT and bringing you that information as much as employees are bringing that ChatGPT information to the company? Frequently before, even just last year, if one of my clients got a demand letter for a former employee, or some sort of long thing that you wronged this employee and we're looking for 60,000 and blah, blah, blah. I would almost always assume it is from a plaintiff's lawyer, right? Or someone who drafted that for an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission charge. Now, I would say more often than not, former employees or employees who want to sue or put in an anonymous letter complaint about something, they're using ChatGPT. And so ChatGPT is good enough that it is bringing up the trigger words, it's harassment, discrimination, retaliation. And so people know what to say. And I'll say frequently former employees will be emailing with they'll get terminated and they'll start emailing with HR and they're like, well, I'm talking to my legal counsel and my legal counsel says this and this, that you violated this whistleblower law and blah, blah, blah. And so, I'd be willing to resolve this though for 6 months of severance. And I'm like, well, if she actually had a legal counsel, the attorney would be communicating. So really, she's just consulting with ChatGPT, because the only people who have a legal team on hand are like the Kardashians. And so frequently, I think employees will use ChatGPT and they'll get the right trigger words, whether it's submitting that internal complaint, an external complaint, you name it. And so that's harder to parse through, right? Is like, what is the real risk here? Are we dealing with an actual attorney who knows what they're talking about? Or are we fighting, an everyday employee who's using the internet to resource their best case?
That's fascinating. Yeah, the tell would be if the letter includes would you like me to include a handy one page checklist on how to speak with your originator?
Right, exactly. The last offer from ChatGPT.
Exactly.
So yeah, to answer your other question about what things are getting employers in hot water, I'd say non-competes are. I mean, there's been a lot of administrative changes under the Biden administration. The Federal Trade Commission tried to issue a rule that basically made all non-competes void except for, really, really, really highly paid people. That went out the window. And now, I mean, it's really a state by state thing, but I think more and more states are passing state laws that make it very hard to enforce non-competes. Many states now have a rule that you can't enforce a non-compete against an employee who is paid hourly and is entitled to overtime. So you can't put in a non-compete for someone who works at the sandwich shop only to prevent them from going down the street and making sandwiches somewhere else, right? I mean, that would be a really, truly unfair competition and hurt someone's ability to market themselves. Or having thresholds that you can't enforce a non-compete for someone that is, makes under a certain threshold, like $75,000. So really forcing employers to think through what actual protectable interests or company interests, like what employees know the secret sauce of the company, or what employees have the sales list, the key sales list, and really being able to protect your interests as a company and using non-competes in the right way.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing. Moving to other the use of AI, other AI tools beyond ChatGPT, and not by employees necessarily, but by employers. So I think we're all sort of, those of us not involved in labor and employment law or in HR in general, I think we're all aware of these AI powered applicant tracking systems, or systems that are used for even performance reviews or managing terminations. So what are some of the pitfalls or some of the things that employers should keep in mind as they use these systems? And what are some of the risks associated with those systems?
Sure. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. It's funny because we just did our performance reviews, and for the first time, we had this great AI tool where, if I'm doing a performance review of my legal assistant or a paralegal, I can kind of type up what I want to say, and then it says like, ask AI, and you click it, and then it gives you an option of, do you want this to be more professional, to be funnier, like to be nicer, or more bullet point, more concise? And you can click the different options and it reworks what you say. And so I can put in the things that I have issues with the person, and then click it, and then it's like, it says it really flowery, which may, as an employment lawyer, I'm going to tell you, may not be the best thing to do. So anyways, yeah, employers are definitely using AI-based tools, whether it's in their payroll systems. And one area there of concern would be, the AI system, it may be smart, but it may not be, for instance, it may be keeping up with federal law and maybe not state law, or the nuances associated with something like that, or a company's particular pay scheme. And so we have seen employers who are using an AI system, and maybe they don't include certain compensation into a calculation to increase an employee's overtime rate that they should have included. And so you're seeing a class action based on that. Recruitment is a big one. There are a lot of scams. And I'd say really just employers who are not with the program when it comes to AI. My recommendation is don't ban AI. If you ban it, employees are just going to take their information and use their cell phone and put all their company information onto their personal ChatGPT login, right, on their phone, and then type it up or something like that. And so really making sure you have policies around what type of information can go into ChatGPT or other AI tools, so that you are protecting company confidential information or client information as well.
That makes a lot of sense. We live in a time of increasing and accelerating innovation, but there's some things that still stay the same, in terms of some of the phone calls that you get, that you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation here. Looking ahead, Leah, what do you think are some of the biggest opportunities for innovation or improvement in the workplace itself? And it could be things that employers do. It could be things that maybe employees are asked to do. Just big picture, what are your thoughts?
Something to improve the overall workplace?
Yeah.
I think that transparency is going to be a major factor moving forward. When my parents were in the workforce, my dad always gave this impression that like the decisions are made and you have to live with it, right? Like that there's a closed conference room where the senior leaders are in there making the decisions, and the decisions come out, and you don't get to ask why or when or how are we doing that, or what's happening with the company that we would make that change. But I don't think that same type of culture can exist anymore. I think between technology, employees are talking all the time, even outside of work, whether they're sending each other Instagram reels or whether they're texting or sending social media things or they're posting on Facebook or X, venting about the workplace and the lack of transparency. I just saw last week a client had a workforce where the employees were posting on a Facebook page, don't cross the picket line. They're not even unionized, right? But they're saying like, if we all don't go in and do this, then, they have to do something. The company has to do something. And so we live in a time where the workplace is different because people are able to communicate more easily and more streamlined. And so companies, I think, have to be more transparent about what they're doing, why they're doing it. And then I think the younger generations dictate that. I'm a millennial. And so I think we're kind of in the middle of, we like to ask why, we like to be a part of the gears and then be a part of it. But we also understand that we're not going to be able to be privy to all decisions that are made from the board or upper leadership. And so, but I don't think that's true for maybe Gen Z or what is it? Gen Alpha maybe is the one coming into the workplace where they kind of demand that transparency. And if not, there's an uprising in a way. I think to improve the workplace, companies need to be training their leadership about that. And they need to be thinking about how they can get those younger generations on board and how they can kind of address I'll say the gossip or whatever's happening on social media and through technology channels to make sure that the culture of the workplace stays positive.
That makes a lot of sense. So a segue to, or a follow-up question to that. So if I'm an HR professional or a business manager who sort of wants to stay on top of, some of these trends that you're seeing in the workplace and stay essentially generally on the right side of employment law, what are some resources that you would recommend that I look at, in addition, obviously, to your video series and firm website?
Okay, good. I was going to say, can I say what's the T in Eleni?
Yeah, of course.
Local Society of Human Resources groups, the Society of Human Resources management groups, SHRM is what they call them. Those are fantastic for getting HR personnel together and having lunch and learns. Industry specific groups are always healthy too, because they bring in outside speakers to talk about these legal updates, right? Whether it's a kind of higher education group or I was just talking to a Virginia motor coach group, there are just a number of different kind of associations that people can get involved in. I'd say stay up to date with what's happening in the news. That is such a funny thing to say, but I do feel like we live in a time where, the news, it can be depressing. And so it's easier to come home and turn on Love is Blind and watch people fall in love through a wall than it is to watch the news and hear an update on the Russia-Ukraine situation or hear about an earthquake in California. But again, as I said before, what's happening in the news, it's making its way into the workplace. And so if you want to be on top of things as a leader or an HR professional, being able to say, oh, wow, this politician was just shot. And I know I've got employees who are either going to support that or go against that, and how am I going to be prepared to walk in tomorrow and to address the conversations about this? Honestly, watching the news, I say it in jest, but it really is important if you're managing a workplace.
That's fascinating. That's if there's any key insight that I got from that, it's how much the workplace mirrors what's happening in the world. So thank you for sharing that. In terms of guidance that you'd give a young associate or maybe somebody who's in law school right now, who's exploring sort of the universe of possibilities within legal practice available to them, what advice would you give them if they're considering labor and employment law, and what skills do you think are necessary in order to be a successful L&E attorney?
I'd say eat everything up. One of my colleagues said that the other day, and I was like, what? Eat everything up? That's so weird. Really just get your hands on everything and anything you can, because even if it's not labor and employment related, like when I first came to the law firm, I had to do foreclosures and debt collections work. But that stuff comes back around, right? I get clients who ask about garnishments or, hey, we have employees who can't pay their bills. What about, can we give them loans through the company? And how do we do that? And so all these things, everything you do, I truly am a believer that there's a reason why you're doing it, or the universe has kind of put these things in front of you. And so to not not be judgmental and say, oh, that's not my area, or I'm not going to have to deal with that, because these things come back around and they make you a better, more well-rounded attorney. So I'd say take on everything you can. And for labor and employment specifically, just being not trying to dictate and just tell clients, hey, here's the law and you can't do this and this and this and this. I was just talking to an associate about it the other day. This client was terminating someone and he said, oh, well, they can terminate them because the law says that they can terminate someone even if they're on medical leave, if they can prove they were going to terminate them anyways, or that position was going to disappear anyways. And so they're fine to terminate them. And I said, they might have a defense, but the problem is lawsuits are not filed by way of what the actual truth is. They're filed based on an employee's perception. And this employee is going to feel like they were wronged. They took a benefit, they went on medical leave, and then while they're on medical leave, probably reliant on the company's health insurance, they get terminated. That's going to really suck for their lives, right? And everyone at their dinner table is going to say, go talk to a lawyer, call my cousin, he's a lawyer. So you as a lawyer have to be mindful of the risks associated with your advice, that it's not just here's the law and conveying that to the client. It's let's talk about the risks. Yes, this is the law, but what's the perception? What kind of other approaches, even from a human standpoint, can we take? If we terminate them, let's offer them a severance, pay for their health insurance for a couple months. Let's figure something out here because we're dealing with humans.
Absolutely. Great insights. Thank you for sharing those, Leah. Final question for you. Is there a question that I should have asked you, but I didn't?
A question? No, but let me ask you a question. How did you get into doing the podcast?
Oh, that's a great question. So outside of the podcast itself, I run a startup that does AI-powered deposition arbitration trial summaries, a whole bunch of other things that are all essentially powered by AI document reviews and analyses and things like that. And my own background, this is funny because nobody's asked me this on my own podcast, but my own background is in engineering, and I have a PhD and a business degree and all of that. And so I came at this from the angle of analysis of documents, not necessarily legal documents, but scientific research documents. So I was a researcher in a past life, etc. So the reason I share all of that is because I'm still learning, or my team and I are still learning about how our products or our offerings can be applied to the legal space. And so I'm everything but an attorney, I like to say. And so one of the things I love to do is understand more from attorneys like yourself and others who have a lot of expertise. And the best way that I've found to do that is, have a conversation and then have the benefits of that conversation accrue to anybody who's listening, hence the podcast. So that's my...
That's interesting. Well, I'm glad I didn't bash AI now that I know that background.
As with everything else, as with every other sort of foundational technology, electricity, fire, and I would put AI into that category. There's thoughtful ways to use it, and there's not so thoughtful ways to use it. So I wouldn't be offended at all, because there's in my view, plenty of people or plenty of ways in which it's not being used thoughtfully. Deep fakes, for example, to mention one.
Sure.
Yeah, no. So yeah, that's my matter.
It's funny because I didn't really think about it being as relevant for depositions, but I recently had a deposition, and then my colleague and I got this email back from the court reporter company that said, here's your AI transcript. And we were like, is that okay, can we just use that? And I opened it and I was like, I don't know. I think we need like a real transcript, And so we were having a back and forth because I hadn't seen that before. And I was like, so do we still order the real one, or did you just give us this one? Or, and she was like, oh, no. This is just like a temporary thing if you have to work on a brief, but it's not real. It needs to be cleaned up and all that. And I was like, oh, okay, well, us lawyers over here are just like, great, click, So I didn't even know that they had that tool that existed. So.
Yeah, no, there's a lot going on in that space, and we can have that conversation separately. But Leah, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. This has been an insightful, engaging, and truly fun conversation. So I appreciate you taking the time and spending it with us here today.
Great, likewise. Well, thank you so much for having me, Aniket.
The Litigator's Edge podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.